beneath towers of white stone and gold. From a distance it looked untouched by the whispers of war. Its banners still flew, proud against the night sky. Its streets still glowed with the warm, steady light of lanterns. But lies have a weight of their own, and tonight the city could no longer carry them. She stood alone on the highest balcony of the palace, a solitary figure watching plumes of smoke rise from districts no one ever spoke about. The council, in their infinite wisdom, insisted the fires were merely unfortunate accidents. The priests, in their solemn pronouncements, called them warnings from the gods. She knew better. They weren't accidents or warnings. They were symptoms of a sickness that festered deep within the city's heart. Ever since she was a child, she had been raised to be a beautiful ornament, to smile through endless ceremonies and speak gently in halls where decisions were made without her consent, without her voice. They dressed her in the finest silks, they crowned her with shimmering gold, they called her beloved. And all the while they used her name, her very image, to excuse everything they did in the shadows. Below the palace, guards moved through the streets with a forced, almost theatrical calm. Every step was measured, precise. Every order was rehearsed, a line from a play they all knew by heart. They were waiting. A palpable tension hung in the air. They were waiting for something to break. They just didn't know it would be her. She descended the grand palace stairs without a single escort. No guards followed. No servants spoke. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the usual bustle of courtly life as she walked. A ripple of awareness spread through the halls. The people noticed her immediately. A princess walking alone was not a normal sight. A princess walking toward the lower districts was something completely unheard of. The air itself seemed to change as she crossed the inner bridge, the symbolic line between the opulent upper city and the struggling lower districts. The sweet scent of palace gardens gave way to something sharp and acrid. The smell of smoke grew thicker, clinging to the back of her throat. The polished stone beneath her feet darkened, stained by soot and neglect. She passed soldiers, men who should have stopped her, who were sworn to protect her, to keep her within the gilded cage of the palace. They didn't raise a hand. Some of them lowered their weapons, a silent gesture of what? Respect, resignation. Others simply looked away, unable to meet her gaze. In that shared silence, it was clear. All of them understood that this moment was not theirs to interfere with. At the very edge of the city stood the old gate. It was a relic, sealed long ago, a monument to a forgotten age, ignored for generations. It was a piece of history that was never meant to be used again. That was the lie. Figures waited near the gate, silent sentinels in the gloom. They were armored in dark, unmarked steel, bearing no banners, no sigils of any known kingdom. They had arrived quietly, slipping into the city's periphery unnoticed. They weren't here to attack, not to conquer. They were here to witness. She stopped just before them. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The night held its breath. Then one of the figures stepped forward, their movements fluid and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was calm, unthreatening, almost tinged with a note of regret. "If you open this gate," he said, the words cutting through the silence, "there will be no way back." She did not answer him immediately. Her gaze drifted back toward the city, toward the gleaming towers of the palace that had been her prison. She saw the council halls filled with silent deceit. She saw the temples empty of true faith. She thought of all the promises made in her name, the suffering that was hidden behind her placid smile. The weight of it all settled upon her, not as a burden, but as a resolve. Then she turned back to the gate. Her face was a mask of determination. She placed her hand upon the cold, ancient stone. The ground beneath them trembled. It wasn't a violent earthquake, but a deep, deliberate shudder, as if the world itself was stirring from a long slumber. Ancient mechanisms, buried for centuries beneath layers of forgotten law and royal decree, awakened. The gate did not resist her touch. It seemed to recognize her, to acknowledge her right to be there. A rush of cold air poured through the opening as the massive stone doors began to part. It wasn't darkness that spilled forth, it was truth. The air was clean, crisp, untainted by the smoke and lies of the city. The armored figures knelt as one, not to a crown, not to a title, but to a choice that had finally been made. She stepped through the gateway without ceremony. There was no applause, no fanfare. She didn't look back. She couldn't. By dawn, the story would already be twisted. The city would call her a traitor. The council would say she abandoned them in their hour of need. The priests would claim she destroyed everything they held dear. They would spin their tales and weave their lies, as they always had, but they would never say the truth. They would never admit that the city had already been broken long before she ever walked toward that gate. They would never acknowledge that she had simply stopped protecting the lie that was holding it all together. Sometimes a door isn't meant to keep things out. Sometimes it exists only to let the truth in. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more tales that explore the line between shadow and light. We'll see you in the next one.